I need to admit something about my job. For 11 years, I've told grieving couples in my fertility clinic in Boston that science can usually buy more time than biology intends to give. It's the sentence my whole career is built on. I say it in exam rooms, in follow-up calls, in the gentle, practiced voice I've developed for delivering difficult odds without delivering despair. There is almost always another option, another cycle, another protocol, another few months where the math might tip in someone's favor. I am, by training and by temperament, someone who believes a bad number is a starting point, not a verdict. I've watched that belief hold up, over and over, across cases that looked hopeless on paper and didn't stay that way. Then my brother called me at 2 in the morning. Raj is younger than me by 3 years, and for as long as I can remember, he's cared about extinction the way other kids cared about dinosaurs, except his obsession never really ended. It just grew up and got a job. He works in wildlife conservation now, mostly reproductive science for endangered species, which means we've spent a strange number of holidays comparing notes across an enormous gap. I coax human embryos toward viability in a clean, climate-controlled lab. He does something adjacent but wilder, out in the field, for animals that can't tell you how they're feeling. On the phone, his voice had the flat, controlled quality of someone trying very hard not to sound as scared as he was. He was calling from a conservancy in central Kenya, and he needed me to actually understand something, not just nod along the way people do when a scientist starts talking about a subspecies. "There are 2 rhinos left," he said. "Just 2. A mother and a daughter. They are, as far as anyone can determine, the last northern white rhinos alive anywhere on Earth, and there hasn't been a living male of their kind in years. The math is not complicated and it is not forgiving. 2 individuals, 0 males, one of the 2 still biologically capable of contributing an egg. Everyone working on this considers the subspecies functionally extinct already. The population count reads 2. But the breeding population, in any meaningful sense, reads 0. He said it slowly, the way I imagine I sound when I'm delivering a number I need a patient to actually absorb rather than just hear. And then he told me about the science. Frozen sperm from males who died years ago. Eggs harvested under sedation from the one female still capable of producing them. Embryos, created in labs in Europe, cryopreserved, waiting. A surrogate program using a closely related subspecies to carry a pregnancy neither remaining female can carry herself. Nearly everything my own field has spent decades building: IVF, embryo cryopreservation, assisted reproduction being adapted and thrown at the walls of an extinction event in real time. I've spent 11 years telling people that if the biology is there and the science is ready, time is usually still on your side. I had never had to sit with a case where the biology was there, the science was ready, and time might simply not cooperate anyway, where the clock wasn't measured in one patient's fertility window, but in the remaining years of 2 aging bodies that the entire hope of a subspecies happened to be standing inside of. I booked a flight 2 days later. I didn't fully understand yet what I was flying toward. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I found myself running the actual math the way I'd run it for a patient file population of 2. 0 living males, 1 female still producing viable eggs, no successful birth yet recorded, and I kept arriving at the same uncomfortable place. In my clinic, a couple with these numbers would still technically have hope, and I would still, technically, be honest in telling them so. But I had never once had to tell a patient their species had a sample size of 2. Nairobi meets you first as noise traffic, glass towers, the chaos of a fast-growing capital going about its morning. And then, almost without warning, the city simply stops, cleanly, at a fence line. And on the other side, the wild world begins as if someone had drawn a hard border between 2 planets. This is Nairobi National Park, established in 1946. And in the decades since, Nairobi has grown up and outward in every direction while the park has stayed exactly where it was. Lions moving through grass at dusk, black rhino drifting cautiously between acacia trees, Maasai giraffe grazing along the horizon at almost exactly the height of the office towers behind them, all of it pressed directly against a skyline of glass and steel, predators hunting in the literal shadow of a stock exchange. Raj met me at the airport looking thinner than I remembered. On the drive out, he pointed to the Ngong Hills rising to our left, 7 rounded ridgelines lined now with wind turbines, turning a near-constant wind into electricity for thousands of homes. We pulled over for a few minutes near the base, mostly because Raj needed the pause as much as I did, watching the blades turn against a sky that kept shifting between full sun and drifting cloud shadow. Maasai herders still walk cattle across those same slopes the way they have for generations. Karen Blixen used to look out at these hills from her farm at the base of them and wrote about them as something close to permanent. I understood exactly what she meant, and more sharply than usual, because I was on my way to see 2 living beings for whom permanence was very much not guaranteed. We broke the drive with one stop at Lake Magadi, a soda lake so alkaline its pH can climb as high as 12, strong enough to damage skin on contact. The water shifts color by the hour: blood red, neon pink, deep bruised purple chemistry, not decoration. The shorelines crust over with soda crystals, sharp underfoot, the air carrying a faint mineral sting. Almost nothing survives in it, and yet flamingos wade through it by the thousands. Protected by alkali-resistant skin and a filtering beak built precisely to strain out the bacteria that color the water and would otherwise be lethal to almost anything else. Watching a few hundred of them move through that hostile pink water with an almost absurd, delicate grace, it was hard not to think about how narrow the margin of survival actually is for most living things. Not a broad tolerance for hardship in general, but one precise adaptation to one precise threat. Useless anywhere else. Perfect exactly here. Raj let that sit for a second before he said what he'd actually brought me there to say. Survival, out here, is never about avoiding extremity. It's about being the one organism, out of thousands, built for the specific extremity in front of it. Najin and Fatu weren't going to be saved by avoiding their situation. If they were going to be saved at all, it would be because a very specific set of tools happened to exist at the exact moment they needed them. We broke the drive again near Lake Naivasha, which after Magadi felt almost aggressively peaceful, calm, fresh water, tall acacia trees, a shoreline that looked, at first glance, like the safest place we'd been all day. Raj told me not to trust that impression. Hippos spend most of their daylight hours submerged there, barely visible, waiting for dusk before they come ashore to graze. And despite their heavy, almost comic bulk, they can move faster than a person can run and will defend their space with an aggression wildly out of proportion to how placid they look resting in the shallows. Most serious wildlife encounters in this part of the country don't start with something that looks dangerous, he said. They start with something that looks exactly like this. Old Paheta doesn't announce itself the way I expected. No glass, no monitors, just a wide, quiet paddock ringed by an electrified fence, watched over by armed rangers at all hours. And there, in the early light, were 2 rhinos grazing with the unbothered rhythm of animals that have done this exact thing every morning for years. From a distance, they could be mistaken for boulders. Up close, they're enormous, moving with a slow calm that made the stakes attached to them feel, for a moment, almost unreal. I stood at that fence for a long time without saying anything, and Raj let me, which was its own kind of kindness. Reading population of 2 in a paper and standing 40 feet from the actual 2 individuals turn out to be entirely different experiences of the same fact. One is information, the other is a mother and daughter leaning into each other the way tired animals do, with no visible awareness of how much hope and money and effort currently orients itself around the 2 of them simply continuing to exist. Najin is the mother, in her mid-30s, her knees showing the wear of a long life partly spent in captivity before she was ever brought to Kenya. Fatu is her daughter, younger, more restless. They arrived from a Czech zoo in 2009, part of a group of 4 moved here in the hope that a natural environment might rekindle some instinct toward breeding that captivity never produced. The math collapsed anyway. A male named Suni died in 2014. The last male anywhere on Earth, Sudan, died in March of 2018, at which point Najin and Fatu became, formally and permanently, the entire remaining population of their subspecies, neither one capable of carrying a pregnancy to term for reasons entirely outside their control. Extinction. I had always pictured as something slow and abstract, a line trending toward zero over centuries. It is not always that. Sometimes it's two specific animals in a specific field, guarded around the clock, whose continued existence is the only thing keeping a subspecies out of the past tense. The science was even more advanced than I'd understood from a 2 a.m. phone call. Since Najin is no longer healthy enough to undergo egg retrieval, the entire genetic hope of the subspecies runs through Fatu alone, sedated for the procedure more than 20 times now, each time carrying its own risk, each time so far recovered without complication. Dozens of embryos exist now, cryopreserved in labs an ocean away, each one a viable combination of Fatu's eggs and a deceased male's preserved sperm. In late 2023, one of those embryos was implanted into a southern white rhino surrogate named Kura, the world's first ever IVF pregnancy in a rhino of any kind. At around 70 days along, Kura died of a bacterial infection unrelated to the pregnancy, and the fetus died with her. Raj had been on site for it. He didn't dress it up as a lesson. It was simply a devastating loss. Absorbed by a team that had already absorbed many, and then set aside so the work could continue. I thought, standing there, about a patient I'd seen the week before. I flew out a woman with 3 failed cycles behind her and 11 frozen embryos, who'd asked me the question I get asked constantly in some form: if the embryos exist, why doesn't that guarantee anything? I'd given her my usual answer, the one about implantation being its own separate hurdle, genetics being necessary but not sufficient. I'd said it so many times by then that it had started to sound, even to me, like reassurance more than fact. Standing in that field, looking at a subspecies with dozens of embryos and 0 births, I felt that sentence land the way it must land on my own patients, not as reassurance, but as the honest, uncomfortable center of the whole situation. I was wrong about something, standing there. Not that the science could work, Kura's pregnancy proved that it can. I was wrong about the emotional shape of what working actually looks like in a project like this. In my clinic, a successful cycle ends the hard part of the story. Out here, a successful implantation was just one hard chapter closing, so an even harder one could open. There is no version of this that ends in relief. There is only a version that ends, eventually, in a living calf or an empty field. That was the mood I was standing inside 3 nights later, when the radio in Raj's tent crackled at just past 4 in the morning. I woke to him already half-dressed, moving with the urgency of someone who has rehearsed this exact sequence in his head and hoped never to need it. Fatu was down, he said. Not resting down and not getting up on her own, which for an animal her size and age is never small. He told me to stay near the vehicle, and then he was gone into the dark. I sat in the truck with the windows down, listening to a landscape that at 4 in the morning sounds aggressively alive, running scenarios forward the way I do at work without meaning to, arriving at the same 2 categories every time, neither of them small. Every few minutes, a radio burst crackled faintly urgent, then urgent and lower, then, for 10 unbearable minutes, nothing at all. I pieced together what happened next from Raj afterward. The ranger on duty, a man named Joseph Lakudin, had guarded Najin and Fatu for 6 years, long enough to know both animals' habits better than most people know their own relatives. He was the one who found her down, and the one who then had to make a decision with no safe version. The full veterinary team was more than 2 hours out by road in the dark, and even by radio, coordinating an emergency intervention on an animal that large carried its own risk. Sedating or restraining a distressed rhino, her size can itself trigger complications severe enough to kill her, especially given how many procedures her body had already absorbed. Waiting for full daylight and a fully prepared team was the textbook safe option. It was also an option that could cost hours. Nobody standing in that field could be certain she had. There was no protocol that told Joseph which choice was correct. Because there wasn't a correct choice available, only two different ways of being wrong if things went badly. He began emergency stabilization immediately with what was already on site, working by headlamp and truck light, monitoring her breathing by hand, while radioing instructions back and forth with a vet, still an hour out. At one point, Raj told me later, they genuinely didn't know whether they were helping her or accelerating whatever was already going wrong inside her. I stood at the fence line for most of that hour once Raj let me come closer, close enough to hear the low, distressed sounds she was making, and nowhere near close enough to help a specific helplessness I recognize professionally, the kind I ask my own patients to sit through during a 2-week wait, except I had never had to sit through it myself, watching something I couldn't control determine the fate of a decision this enormous. At one point I found myself doing the math again, the same math I'd run on the plane. Except this time it wasn't abstract, it was a specific animal. 40 feet away, breathing audibly in the dark, and the entire weight of a subspecies resting on whether that breathing kept its rhythm through the next hour. Somewhere in that hour, I understood, more completely than any statistic Raj had ever given me, what it means for a subspecies to depend on two individuals. A single bad night can end something that took millions of years to build, and it cannot, under any circumstances, be undone afterward. There is no second population to draw from. There is only whatever happens in this field, tonight, to this specific animal. She got back up a little before dawn. The full veterinary team arrived shortly after, confirmed a severe but survivable gastrointestinal episode, and by mid-morning Fatu was grazing again, slower than usual, watched more closely than usual, but alive. Nobody treated it as a triumph. Raj told me, over coffee neither of us was really drinking, that nights like that happen more often than the outside world hears about, and that the team has learned to metabolize them quickly because there is always another morning, another decision, waiting right behind the one that just ended. Once the danger had passed, Raj wanted me to see a little more of the country before I flew home, partly because he needed the break, and partly because he wanted the 2 rhino math to sit inside something larger. I understood the impulse. Staying inside that one enclosure, replaying the night, would have meant marinating in exactly the kind of narrow, airless focus I recognize from my own worst weeks at the clinic, the ones where a single difficult case starts to feel like the entire shape of the field, rather than one particularly hard example inside a much larger, much stranger set of stories. You can see Mount Kenya from parts of the Conservancy at sunrise, snow visible on its upper slopes, even standing almost exactly on the equator. To the Kikuyu people, it's the home of Engai, the god of creation. And elders traditionally face the mountain when they pray. Standing there, having just watched one animal's survival determine the fate of an entire subspecies, I thought about how many different scales of permanence a single landscape can hold a mountain treated as eternal for centuries, and, less than a day's drive away, a species reduced from tens of thousands of individuals to 2 within a single human lifetime. We drove north to Lake Turkana, the largest desert lake on Earth, black volcanic rock and heat, home to one of the largest populations of Nile crocodiles anywhere. But it was the eastern shore Raj actually wanted me to see. Kubifora, one of the most significant fossil-bearing sites ever discovered, skull fragments and stone tools that have repeatedly rewritten scientists' understanding of early human evolution, some nearly 2 million years old. I stood on ground that had, at various points, held the bones of some of the earliest members of our own genus, a few days after standing in a field holding what might be the final 2 members of an entirely different one. Survival, for any lineage, including eventually our own, has never been guaranteed by size or history or how long it has already persisted. It's contingent, every generation, on conditions holding. We stopped too, at Amboseli, plains opening flat and wide beneath a snow-capped Kilimanjaro rising just across the border in Tanzania. Amboseli holds one of the largest remaining elephant populations in Africa, matriarch-led family groups that researchers have tracked for decades, individuals identified by ear, shape, and tusk pattern going back to the 1970s. Watching one family cross a dry lake bed, an entire herd's pace shifting instantly around a stumbling calf, felt like a strange, useful contrast. One day after Old Pajeda, a population recovering and thriving through nothing more complicated than protection and time, right alongside a population that time had almost entirely run out on before anyone had the tools to intervene. Not every part of this country's relationship with wildlife carries the tone of careful, hopeful science. Raj took a detour to show me Tsavo, where, during construction of the railway line in the late 1890s, 2 male lions systematically attacked the workers building it, dragging men from their tents at night over months before they were finally killed. Construction reportedly stalled for weeks at a time, thorn barriers and campfires proving useless. The exact toll has been argued over for more than a century, but even conservative estimates run into the dozens. It's an uncomfortable corrective to the glossy version of wild Kenya, a reminder that the same landscape capable of producing a mother and daughter worth an international scientific effort is also a landscape that has, within recorded memory, simply killed people going about their work. On the coast, near Mombasa, that same layered history shows up in stone rather than in wildlife. Fort Jesus sits directly over the old harbor, built by the Portuguese in the 1500s, and over the following centuries, every power that wanted this stretch of coast left its mark on those same walls. Portuguese, then Omani, then British, one occupation layered on top of the last, with cells below the courtyard once used to hold people during the era of the East African slave trade. It's a different kind of survival story than everything else. Raj showed me that week, not a species running out of time against nature, but the visible residue of specific human choices, made deliberately over centuries. On the way back toward Nairobi, we passed the edge of the Aberdare Range, dense cold rainforest and tangled bamboo, mist settling permanently between the trees. During Kenya's colonial era, these mountains sheltered Mau Mau resistance fighters, using the forest's density as cover in a years-long guerrilla campaign the colonial administration never fully countered. Their camps are long abandoned now, mostly reclaimed by the same forest that once hid them. But the history sits under the landscape the way most difficult histories do, quietly and permanently, whether or not a given visitor knows to look for it. On my last afternoon, we caught the edge of the Masai Mara, too early for the full Great Migration, but close enough to see dust rising in the distance and hear the low rumble of that many hooves moving at once, more than 1 million wildebeest, trailed by zebra and gazelle and, close behind, lions who have learned exactly how to read the chaos, picking off the ones who stumble or fall too far behind. Massive, precise, and utterly reliable, repeated every year with a kind of confidence Najin and Fatu's story doesn't currently have the luxury of assuming. We passed a Maasai village on the way back to the main road, young men practicing the adumu, the vertical jumping dance historically used to demonstrate a warrior's strength and self-control. Maasai boys once proved their readiness for warriorhood by confronting lions directly. That practice has largely ended now, replaced in most communities by conservation programs that redirect the same discipline toward protecting wildlife rather than confronting it. Watching them jump, I thought about Joseph Lekutan again, a very different kind of guardian, drawing, I suspect, on something not so different. I flew home 2 days later. Raj stayed. Obviously, there was never a version of this trip that ended with him coming with me. We talk more often now than we used to, which might be the one uncomplicated good thing to come out of a very complicated week. He called again about 6 weeks after I'd landed back in Boston, and this time I picked up on the first ring, already braced. It was good news, for once. Fatu had fully recovered, no lasting complications, and the team had completed another egg retrieval without incident. One more contribution to the small, frozen collection waiting in labs thousands of miles from the field where she actually lives. No pregnancy yet. No calf. Just one more careful step forward in a process that has learned, the hard way, not to celebrate any single step as though it were the whole outcome. Raj sounded lighter than he had in months. And for a while we just talked about ordinary things, his upcoming leave, Whether Najin had gotten any grumpier now that Fatu had a new companion she preferred spending time with. It felt for the length of that call almost like any other conversation between siblings, which after the week we'd had together was its own small kind of relief. I don't think the lesson I took from that week is really about rhinos. Not only, it's about how easily the science exists gets treated, in my own head and probably in most people's, as functionally the same thing as the outcome is secure. I've spent 11 years reassuring patients that possibility and inevitability are different things, while apparently still needing to relearn that distinction myself. Watching 2 rhinos and the people devoted to them, the embryos exist. The technique exists. None of that has ever meant the story is finished. It means the door is still open, which is not nothing, and is also not everything. What stays with me most isn't the science. It's the image of a man standing in a dark field at 4 in the morning, making an irreversible decision with incomplete information, because waiting for perfect information wasn't a choice actually available to him. I think about how much of what we call progress in a fertility lab, in a conservancy, anywhere depends on people willing to act inside exactly that kind of uncertainty, over and over, without knowing in advance whether it will have been the right call. I think about the flamingos in that impossible pink water, and how much of what looks like resilience from the outside is really just a long accumulation of specific, unglamorous decisions. None of them guaranteed, all of them necessary anyway. A short breath before I let you go. If this story changed how you think about what still time actually means, I'd genuinely like to know which part of it stayed with you. Because somewhere in a guarded field in central Kenya right now, a specific ranger is watching a specific animal breathe, and the entire future of a subspecies is quietly, unglamorously, still depending on that one unremarkable act of attention. How many species are we already standing this close to the edge of, without anyone outside a single fence line ever finding out in time? This narrative is told through the perspective of Dr. Priya Anand, a fictional reproductive endocrinologist, and includes the fictional composite characters Raj Anand and Joseph Lekuton. Najin and Fatu are real northern white rhinos living at Olpejeta Conservancy, and the scientific details of the biorescue program described here, including the death of surrogate Kura in 2023, are real and presented as accurately as possible at the time of writing. The specific overnight medical crisis described in this script is a fictionalized composite, not a documented real event.